This is a prophetic conference, and we've been doing a couple of things. Firstly, we've been looking at general things about the prophetic that are some helpful kind of experiences that I've done, some lessons that I've learned. And I'll talk about some mistakes that I've made so you don't have to make them too. I hope that you can learn everything that I've learned, and I'm really am. I'm wanting to share all my trade secrets. I'm trying to pull the curtains right back. I'm not hiding anything. I'm not keeping anything in secret. I want this to be accessible to you. I want it to be within grasp. I want you to come away from this conference, as people have and other times, feeling like, yeah, I could do this. In actual fact, when I'm in the now please don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but when I am in the presence of a gifted artist or a gifted person, I'm inspired to do what they do. When I listen to a great guitarist, I think, oh, I'd love to be able to play the guitar. Or I watch a great painter and I think, man, I'd love to paint. So I'm hoping that if anything that I do that is good, it will inspire you to want to move in the prophetic. Because the Bible is clear. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, Paul says, I wish that you could all prophesy. In actual fact, he says like this, I wish you could all speak in tongues, but more that you would prophesy. So Paul elevates prophecy. He elevates it. Pursue love, yet desire earnestly spiritual gifts, but especially that you might prophesy. So Paul elevates prophecy. Why does he do that? Have you ever thought about that? I try and read the scriptures like it's the first time I found the book. It's like I've just become a Christian. So when I read the scriptures, I try and not remember anything else I've read before. Because you become so familiar with it that it just sort of washes over your mind. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, blah, 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 blah. It's all like... But I try and break it down. I say, for God so loved the world. God is in love with the world. That he gave. When God loves, he gives. His only son. So that we would not perish. I changed the word world to my name. For God so loved Tony Saxon that he gave his only son. So I try and make the scriptures fresh to me. Every time I read them. Well, there's some pieces I skip, the begots and the begats. That gets a bit boring pretty quick. I do read it every now and again out of an act of discipline and respect, but I do find them a bit boring. But generally, I try and read the scriptures like I've never read them before. So when Paul says, desire earnestly spiritual gifts, but especially that you may prophesy, I wonder why that would be the case. Why would Paul say that? He wasn't primarily a prophet. He was an apostle. You would think he would say, desire to be apostle. But he doesn't. So he's to desire to be a prophecy, to prophesy. And he shows us why in verse 3, as I mentioned yesterday, because the one who prophesies speaks to others for edification, which is to build up, exhortation, which is to stir up, and consolation, which is to cheer up. So Paul's saying prophecy is so critical because it does these three things better than anything else, any other gift. It does these three things, and we need lots of it. Now, there's another reason he says this, and we'll come back to some of the questions. Michael, if you could put the verse up from 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 18, in any translation at all, I don't mind. Even the Jerusalem Bible's good. (1:18). So, a bit of backstory. Paul is either, like I said, he's either come out of prison, he's going to prison, or he's in prison. And he's coming towards the end of his life. He has seen Europe changed. He's worked in Macedonia, and I've just not come back from that place, although the Macedonia he was in is now Greece. But he's worked through Eastern Europe and he's seen remarkable things. seen miracles, signs and wonders, and he's formed a church there. God's used him to create a church in Eastern Europe, and he knows he's about to die. He knows he's about to depart this planet, and he's got Titus and Timothy, primarily Aquila and Priscilla, Apollos. Him and Mark have had a bit of a scrap, and so have him and Barnabas, so we don't know how close they were at that time. But he's handing the church over to a bunch of men and women, but particularly Titus and Timothy. Timothy was his 2IC, his protege. And so he is writing Timothy. This is not just a how you doing letter. This is a letter of real important information. And I explained yesterday how difficult it was both to write and how expensive paper was. So he's writing this to Timothy, and this is what he says to Timothy: "This command I entrust to you, Timothy, my son, that in accordance with the prophecies made previous to concerning you, that by them you fight the good fight of faith." Now, I could have done this a different way, and it would have been kind of playing with you, really, and I don't want to do that, but it's more impressive. Without putting that verse up, I could have said to you, we fight the good fight of faith by what? And most would have said the sword of the Spirit. Ephesians chapter 5. But that's not what Paul's saying here. Excuse me. So let's look through this. Paul starts this verse off with an unusual word. He only uses it about 4 times in the New Testament. He uses the word command. This command. So this is not a suggestion. This is not just a good idea. Paul's not saying to Timothy, in between updating your Twitter and your Facebook account, just have a think about this. It's a command. He's ordering him to do something. He's ordering him to do it not just as a father, but as an apostle. And he's saying, this command, Timothy, and he uses this other phrase, which is unusual, I entrust it to you. So he's not just commanding Timothy, he's giving Timothy a command. He is commanding Timothy, but he's giving him a command that he wants him to carry around with him, to treat it as something that he would carry with him, that it would be part of his journey, that he would take it to every church that he went to. This command I'm entrusting you, Timothy, that by the prophecies, or Timothy, my son, that in accordance with the prophecies made previous to concerning you, that by them you fight the good fight of faith. Now, Michael, I don't know whether you can perform magic. I'm sure you possibly can. I should have asked you this morning, but if there was any way of you is there any chance you getting the beach scene from the movie Save It, Private Ryan up there for a bit? Yeah. I'll just talk about other stuff until you know. I just want the beach scene, Omaha Beach. I warn you, this will be brutal for those who haven't seen it. If we can do it, it'll be fun. I should have warned him earlier. But so Paul's saying to Timothy, I'm entrusting you a command. Now, how many here? There's a number of parents here. You know what it felt like when somebody first came to you, and you entrusted your child to them. You put them in the car seat, but you knew you weren't driving. You remember that time? Or you remember when you first took them to school? And you walk away? There we go. Yeah, you can work magic. Okay, I'll tell you when. We're not to get some lights off as well. But so you're entrusting your child to somebody else. Paul's entrusting this command to Timothy. He's entrusting it to him. When that movie premiered in New Zealand, the premiere was attended by World War II veterans. And they interviewed them live as they came out of the theatre. The first man that came out, with tears rolling down his face, and the interviewer said, "What did you think?" Trembling, he said, "The only thing missing was the smell." It was like for us, we did this. Men and women Why do I show that when I'm talking about the prophetic? Well, Paul says, back to that verse, thanks, Michael. This command I entrust to you, Timothy, my son, that in accordance with the prophecies made previously concerning that by them you fight the good fight of faith. We're in a battle. We're in a real fight. We're fighting not just for our lives, we're fighting for eternity, for people's eternity. We don't compete against another church or another another church. We're competing against hell. And the thing that shocks me sometimes is that as Christians, as leaders, as ministers, we send people out into battles with very little to fight with. If your son or your daughter or your father or your mother was on Omaha Beach that morning, June 1944, you'd want them to have a real gun in their hands. You'd want that thing to really shoot bullets. You wouldn't want it to be plastic. You wouldn't want it to have a rubber knife. You'd want them to be well trained, well equipped with weapons of warfare. Timothy, my son, in accordance with the prophecies made previously concerning you, that by them, by the prophecies made concerning you, by them you fight the good fight of faith. We send kids, young people, children, into schools, into universities, into the community. We send men and women into workplaces, sometimes with very little to fight with. It's our job as Christians, as leaders, as people who are interested in the prophetic, is to wrap people up with as many prophetic words as they can get, because they're going to need them. It's war out there. And so for me, the reason I do what I do, the main reason I do what I do, is that I'm trying to equip people for a battle. I'm wanting to give them decent weapons of warfare. I apologise, that movie's brutal. You can watch it anytime you want, Saving Private Ryan. That beach scene goes on for 10 minutes. You just want it to stop. But here's the thing, we can get it to stop. We just turn our TV off. These guys couldn't. My mother and father lived through the Second World War. My uncle was killed in the Second World War. My mother was a postmistress. She used to deliver the telegrams. So I warned them before I showed the movie. I said, that's brutal. It really hurt. We watched it before Anzac Day, because we used to go to the Anzac the Anzac service every April the 25th. So we watched it on April the 24th at my place. And I warned them. At that beach, and I look up, and my father's got his hand in his face in his hands with his eyes closed. And my mum is just shaking her head, looking away. But at a spiritual level, this is what we're dealing with. And we all know people that have been lost in the battle. We all know people that we've loved, cared for, and walked with that no longer walk with Jesus, that have lost their faith, that have found it too hard going. We all know those people. And you want to wrap people around with good words of prophecy, good words of encouragement, so that they can fight. Example. You can Google this guy, he's famous. A guy called Stuart Collette. You'll find him on my Facebook. He's a friend, one of the only few I've got. No, seriously, but here's a friend with Facebook with me. About 15 years ago, I think it was, I can't remember the actual date, I'm travelling through a city in New Zealand, and we're just doing a public meeting. It's not actually at a church, it's just a public open meeting for the community, for Wellington City, the capital. And we're expecting maybe 200 or 300 people to be there. And so I go to the meeting. Now, what I did not know is, well, I know this. My friend, a guy called Don Smith, is a psychologist. And part of his job as a psychologist is to assess people before they go to the mission field or when they come back on furlough, to see whether or not they are in a fit psychological state to go on the mission field or to go back to the mission field. So for an organisation called Partners International. He does a lot of organisations, but that's the organisation this person was with. He interviews this young couple, and after the interview, he declines them. He says, you're not in a fit state to go to the mission field. I'm not approving your application. They're brokenhearted. They've been learning the language. They have all their hopes and dreams are in that nation. They love this nation. I don't know these people. I've never met them before in my life. And as they're leaving his office, he says to them, do you have a word from God that you should go to the mission field? Do you have a word that says you should be in that nation? And they said, no, we don't. We just have this longing, this ache. Just all of our life we've wanted to be there. And he said, well, like a friend of mine is coming to town tomorrow, speaking at a meeting. He moves in the prophetic. Why don't you come along and I'll get him to pray for you at the end of the service? He knows the rules. He doesn't tell me anything. So I go to the service, and they didn't have to wait that long. As they walk into the service, I said, this couple over here that just walked in now, I have a word for you. I see you sitting in an auditorium, and the flags of the world are around the walls of the auditorium, and you sit beneath the flag of the nation that you are called to. You are meant for the mission field. Now, my friend is sitting up the front, Don. They're sitting in the back, and I can see some sort of reaction happening with him. His head goes down, and he's just shaking his head. Like I say, it could either be good or it could be bad. Have no idea. Don't read that. So at the end of the service, they come up, and I said, I want to pray for you at the end of the service. So they come up, and he's standing with them, and I said, do you know these people, Don? He said, yeah, I've recently met them. That's all he says. I said, okay, so I'll just pray with them right now. So when I lay hands on them, I said, you're called to the nation from the flag you sit underneath at church every Sunday, and you're meant to go. Secondly, when you go, some crisis will happen on site. You'll lose your buildings. There's a fire or something that will happen. There'll be no loss of life, but there'll be a disaster that destroys your facilities. You'll go mobile. You'll go into buses and trucks, and it'll change the face of the mission. Thirdly, there'll be things that happen while you're in the mission field that a lot of people would give up. They wouldn't sustain it. They'd walk away from it. Stay on the mission field. Don't give up. God's got you there for a purpose. And then, so I said, does this make it? They're crying. I said, does this make any sense to you? And they said, yeah, it does. And then Don looks at me and says, Tony, I declined them yesterday. Okay, maybe one of us has got it wrong, or maybe we're both right. See, there's the genius of the and, not necessarily either or. So I just said to them, you have to listen to the psychologist. You have to address the issues that he's identified that you need to address in your life. Address those issues, then go. But I think you should go. Now, ironically, about a year later, I'm speaking at a church in the same city area, a suburb like in, Northern Beaches or somewhere, out of the main centre. And I'm standing in that church, and it's like many churches do. They have the flags of the world all around the wall. So it's not that uncommon. I've seen it many times. And I point to this guy. He's now got a beard and he's got glasses. And I point to him. He's sitting on his own. I said, this guy over here, are you married? And he said, yeah, my wife is out with the kids. I said, it'd be really good if you go and get her. So they go and get his wife and his children. And I said, you're called to the nation of the flag that you're sitting under right now. What are you still doing in this country? You should go there. I don't even know what the nation is. I have no idea. And he stood up and said, you've said this to me before. And I said, really? He said, yeah, a year ago, I didn't have a beard and I wasn't wearing glasses, but you told us about going to this nation, and this is the nation. The nation's Myanmar, Burma. And we're going in 2 or 3 months' time. We've dealt to the issues that the psychologist said we should deal to, and now we're going. Okay, great story, fantastic. About 6 or 7 years later, I'm at a birthday party in my hometown in Nelson, miles away from everywhere. I'm at a birthday party. It's at a minister's house, at a manse. And when I walk past the church, I can see there's a meeting happening in the church. I didn't take any notice of it. I'm coming for a birthday party. So I go to the birthday party. While I'm at the birthday party, somebody comes up and taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around and they say, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't. I'm sorry, I don't." And they said, "Well, several years ago, you gave me a word about this." And as he explained it, I thought, "Oh, I remember that. It was so spectacular." And he said, "I just want to tell you that last year, 6,500 children were fed, clothed and educated in Burma because of that word. Thank you so much." We went to Burma, or Myanmar. Our facilities did burn down. We did go mobile. We got into buses and trucks, changed the face of our ministry. While I've been over there, my house was destroyed in the Christchurch earthquake, so I lost all my possessions. While I've been there, my mother has committed suicide. All that's enough to get you off the mission field. But he said, we've stayed on the mission field. I said, of course I come back from my mum's funeral, but we stayed there because we fought with that word you gave us. In the midst of the fray, in the midst of the battle, those of you who know Myanmar or Burma know that their lives have been risked on a regular basis. We fought with that word you gave us. We fought the good fight by the prophecies made previous to concerning us. So when you're sending people into the battle front, like Omaha Beach, you want them to be equipped with stuff that they'll fight with. I know for myself, there have been times when I've been tempted, there are times when I've been wanting to give up. There's been times when there is an easier way for me making a living. And a better living than what I make now. But I fight. I think, no, I know what I'm called to do. I know who I am. I've got words that I can fight the good fight with. So the reason we prophesy to people is to equip them, to train them, to give them weapons of warfare, so that when they find themselves in a place of discouragement, so when they find themselves in a place of temptation, when they find themselves in a place of disillusionment, when they find themselves in a place where they want to give up, or they just feel it's far too hard, they can say, no, I got a word that said this is what I'm called to do. I've got a word, I've got a promise. And I'm not giving up. I'm not backing down. I'm not walking away. Prophecy is critical. That's why Paul elevates it. Desire earnestly spiritual gifts, but especially that you might prophesy. Greater is the one that prophesies. Because he elevates it because of what it does. Prophecy is not elevated because it has more authority. It just has a different effect. I cringe when people think prophets have a higher authority than anyone else. I think it's dumb, stupid stuff. But prophecy is really, really important because of what it can do. What it can do for you, what it can do for me. What it can do for our sons and our daughters and our brothers and our sisters, the people that we love. That's why we want prophecy. To give them weapons of warfare so that when they find themselves on a beach scene just like this, they know that Kevlar vest is a Kevlar vest. They'll be protected. That they've got good weapons of warfare. So it's really, really important. I'm sorry to make it a bit of a sober start to the day, and please forgive me if I offended anybody by that movie. Please, I did warn you though. I could have let you walk out of the room. If you could have done any time you wanted, or just close your eyes. But I watch that movie once or twice a year just to remind myself why I do what I do. I really do. I think this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to give people weapons of warfare because they'll face battles that I will never face. Some years ago, I was in a small town in New Zealand and I picked a young guy out. He was 18. We're talking small town. I pointed him out and said to him, you are called to be a man of significant wealth. You will get your wealth not in this nation, not New Zealand, but in another nation. You need to remember who you are. God wants to give you, generate wealth around you for the sake of the gospel. You're You will provide for missionaries, you'll provide for missions, you provide for ministries. This is who you're called to be. Be careful. Don't forget God when you become rich and famous. It's really important you don't. And also don't forget me, I always say. They always do. I don't know how come it works, but... Now, I was just in that town recently, and I said, how's it... About 6 years ago, I was here, and I gave this really unusual word to this guy. What's he up to? And they said, oh, you won't believe it. He's in London. He's in the music industry. He's very, very wealthy, worth about £3 to £4 million. He's 26 or 23 or something. But he's forgotten everything. His parties are... His house is a party pad. He's long gone from God, long gone from everything. And I think, at least when he faces God or when he faces me, he can't say I wasn't given anything to fight with. I gave him something to fight with. Now, on the opposite side of that, I have a friend who's working in another nation, and he would say, he talks to me regularly, probably every week or every 2 weeks, and says, I'm still, as a missionary in this nation, only because of the words that you've given me. Now, I know I've got the Bible, of course. I've got the Holy Spirit in myself. But I go back to those words and say, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is why I face this situation, because of the words that you, primarily me, because he doesn't have many other prophetic people in his life. But what we're doing when we prophesy is we're giving people weapons of warfare. So I think take it very seriously. To have fun with it, of course. You see, I do. But have fun with it, but take it very seriously, because it's important. That thing you're telling somebody may be the difference between life and death for them in a particular moment. It may be the thing between discouragement and to carry on. It may be the difference between them saying, yep, I'm going to keep this up, or I'm going to walk away. You can see Paul doing it with Timothy and Titus. Don't forget who you are. And so prophecy for me is so important, because you're calling people into a destiny and a purpose, giving them the weapons to fight that battle with. Is that all right? Very serious start to the morning. Sorry about the movie. Please forgive me if it offended anybody. Michael, questions? Somebody's asked me to qualify this statement, which I will do. I said yesterday that it's important that we don't speak from imagination, from our own imagination. And Jeremiah does warn against this. He says that there are prophets that are not from God, that speak from their own, prophesy out of their own imagination. So I'll do that. There's two sort of parts to that question. It's a tricky thing. Don't prophesy from your own imagination, but that's where God mostly speaks to us, is in our imagination. Mostly. Sometimes it'll be in my memory, I'll remember something, but it's in my imagination. And like I say, I have a dialogue with God. I ask him more information. I get more pictures. So it's important that we know. But what I'm saying is, you're responding to something that's been dropped into your heart or into your imagination. You're not creating it. And there's the difference. There's a difference. I do pull things down from heaven. I do ask. I do plead with him. I do ask him to give me more. But it's just like it drops into me rather than me making it up. Now, it seems confusing because I've already talked about the fact that the way that I recraft stuff or reassemble stuff or rewrite stuff that I hear. But again, the difference between divination and revelation is that revelation asks questions, divination draws conclusions. So divination asks questions, revelation draws conclusions. So I'm always asking questions. Is this you, Lord? What more do you want me to say? How will this encourage this person? How will this build them up? Divination says the position of the stars mean this, or the black cat means that, or the tea leaves mean this. So it's drawing conclusions as opposed to asking questions. So that's an important thing. And I think it was at these meetings, or the last church I was at, I can't remember now, it's all blurred into one at the moment, but somebody asked me, what's the difference between a psychic and a prophet? Was it here? No. Okay. Psychic and a prophet. To me, it's like this. The psychic, the difference to me, psychic or prophet, is who gets the glory at the other end. Where's the person's heart tipped afterwards? Prophecy tips people's heart to Jesus, even if they're not Christian. Like I say, I work with lots of non-Christians, and many times, and this always surprises me. Many times when I'm working with a non-Christian and I give them a word, and again, it's not religious speak. It's just I just chat to them. When you walked in the room, I had this funny picture that came into my mind. I saw this picture of you being pregnant with twins. How did you know that I'm pregnant with twins? I just found out last week. Fancy that. So then you can just carry on speaking to them. And then what's amazing to me is that often they will say at the end of that conversation, like this woman particularly, this woman said, I don't have a Bible left in the house anymore. I haven't been to church for years. Now, I haven't said I'm a Christian. I haven't said anything about God. But her heart's tipped towards him. The woman that I talked about writing her suicide note out, I do that upstairs or do it down here? Upstairs, okay. So another situation. Same in a non-Christian environment. I'm working with so in this context, I'm working with a business. I'm there as what they call a cultural architect. I'm helping shape the culture of the organisation. I'm there as a technician, basically, a business mentor. Around leadership, not so much around business. So I'm sitting down, I'm interviewing the staff, and my friend, who's the CEO, he says, this is Tony Saxon, he's from New Zealand, he's my friend, he's my coach, my life coach, and he's very perceptive. That's all he says. And he's going to maybe ask you some questions, and he'll say some stuff about stuff for you that he thinks about maybe where you could fit into the organisation. And we'll just see how this goes. There should be a law against this, honestly. There probably is, I'd imagine. So we sit down. So I sit down with this woman. I look across at her and I said, hi, when you walked into the room, I just had this thought come into my mind and I just want to share it with you. And she said, yeah, okay. She doesn't really know what's happening. I said, 18 months ago, I saw you write a statement on a piece of paper. Was your intentions? It's something that you were going to do. You wrote it on a piece of paper, you folded it, you put it up on a shelf in your lounge room, and I want to thank you for not going through with it. I want to thank you for not taking your life 18 months ago. Now this is a woman who she's in a business meeting. This is a coaching session. Whole world's being tipped upside down. She's burst into tears and says, who are you? And I said, what do you mean? She said, are you a psychic? And I said, and she said, no, you're not. Because I've been to psychics before, but this feels somehow cleaner. It's somehow more pure. And then she said, and I don't even have a Bible. And I haven't been to church for such a long time. I feel like I want to pray. Remarkable. Remarkable. And in that case, we got a chance just to tell her about Jesus. But so it's all kind of come from that point of where you are trying to hear from God, but you're trying to intervene in people's lives at such a level and such a depth. You're trying to give her weapons of warfare to fight with. And so when we're coming to the difference between divination and, or not speaking from your own imagination, it is a fine line at times, but I just think really keep to that point where you think, is this me or is it God? And we talked about that yesterday, but then just pushing through very gently with that. But I think that there will be times when it feels like you are just making it up as you go. It just does. To be honest, it's just exactly how it feels. But the important thing is that you're not. Don't make it up. Don't cross that line. And there is a line you'll cross. You'll feel it. You'll know it. I am making this up, or I'm not. In that process, it's really important that people often say, how do you prophesy to people you know? It's easy. It's easy. Just declare what you do know to them straight up. So I spoke to Emily, who's here somewhere, last night. Now, I know Emily's a nurse, and so I declared that. I cleared it up front. And Emily, I remember you're a nurse. We've had a couple of encounters before, so I declare what I do know right up front. And then I speak about the next thing that I feel like God's saying. So don't use a bit of previous information as a little bit of impressive. I know this about you, and this gets more risky as you go on, and more riskier as you do more work. Sometimes you begin standing in a queue for a coffee, and you can overhear a conversation in front of you. Don't use that information, because you are on the edge of witchcraft and divination. You are on the edge. Don't use it. And be very, very careful of it. It looks impressive, but it's dangerous, because you're lying, basically. You can say, you were in the queue before me when you're getting coffee, and I heard you say this and this, and I feel like the Lord wants me to say this to you. So you can use that information, but declare it up front. Not speaking from your own imagination is really around us not making it up. But like I say, sometimes it'll feel you are, the other kind of disclaimer that you can get into is that you can actually just say, this could be just me. This could be just me. Please judge it, examine it, see if it's God or not. So if you're not sure at one point, you can say you can get away with that by just laying that down. Can you explain what you mean by not trusting what you see with your eyes because it leads to divination? The scriptures are clear. We don't walk by sight, we walk by faith. And so often when I'm praying for somebody or prophesying to them, I'll close my eyes, or if in a public meeting like this, I'll divert my eyes from them quite a lot, for two reasons. One is it's particularly intense. It's intense for them, it's intense for me, it's exhausting. Secondly, I don't want to read what their face is saying, because you just can't. You can't afford to. I mean, Kiwis are great, and Australians are are just about as good. But you can. I was actually here last year. I pointed to this guy, not in this church, but I pointed to this guy in Sydney, and I said to him, excuse me, I said, you, sir, I saw you surrounded by all these numbers. It was like, there was like heaps of numbers. You weren't just accounting, you were accounting for accountants. It's like doing all these numbers over and over again. He's like this. So that could be shock. It could be, means nothing to me. It could be, I hate your guts. Don't like you. It could be, I don't understand a word you're saying. Or it could be, I think you're talking about the guy behind me. You don't know what that look means. So don't read it. So I said, and secondly, I saw you coming out of the red, going into the black. So accounting, red is you're in debt, black is you're in credit. Coming out of the red into the black. And so you're about to change, the balance is about to change. And you'll end up not having to work across a number of different locations or a number of different areas of work, but you're going to go into one single office and one single responsibility, but it's in the black. You're meant to say yes to the job that's in the black. You go into the black. Does that mean anything to you? Okay. Have you ever had a word before? Okay, what do you think? That's it. So you cannot read that. Don't even try. he comes up to me afterwards and said, so what was the go with that? He said, oh, I've never had a word before. I was a bit shocked, really. I said, so that's what shock looks like? He said, I was a bit shocked, really. He said, but funny thing, I didn't know that prophecy was like that. And I said, well, he said, because I felt like you were just chatting to me. And I said, well, I was. And he said, the funny thing, there was lots of coincidences in what you said. And I was just like, what? He said, well, I work in a company in Redfern, and we do some work in Redfern. You know what Redfern is. We do some work in there, and it's one of the companies I work for. And I've just resigned from that job, and I start a job in not on Blackpool, but called Blackmores, which is the big the nutritional company. And he said, that's a funny coincidence, eh? Whatever you like to call it, bro. So don't trust your eyes, because you just cannot trust them. Because I think when you're working from your eyes, you do, like I've seen this happen. I've seen this really nasty stuff. I've seen people come up for prayer and they'll, like, I've told people off for this. There's a woman came up for prayer. I was working with another guy at a conference, standing together. She came up for prayer, and you could see that she was a cat lover, and she didn't have a sticky roller. She hadn't gone and done cat fur herself. So she had this cat fur on her jacket and stuff. And he said, oh, Lord, bless my sister. I see you surrounded by cats. And I think, that is naughty. You can see that she's surrounded by cats. And she's half cat. So I said to him, mate, I wish you wouldn't prophesy with my eyes. I just wouldn't do it. It's dangerous territory, because you're on that edge of divination. You're on that edge of making stuff up that you're using your eyes. The Bible says that God doesn't judge by what his eyes see. God sees the heart. And so I try and look away. I try and not read people. Because like when you're prophesying to somebody and they start crying, well, that could be good or it could be bad. When they open the mouth, like, it could be good or it could be bad. Generally, it's normally like, it's good. But I try and ignore it. So most times when I'm speaking to somebody, I kind of look about 75 millimetres above their eyes. So just at the top, looks like I'm looking at their eyes. Looks like I'm making perfect eye contact, but I'm not looking at their eyes at all. Because I just find it too intense. It's intense for them, but I don't want to read them. I just want to be really faithful to what I'm saying. So has that made that clear? Yeah. It's really, really important. Now, there are times when you will see things in your mind, or you will recognise somebody because you've seen them in a dream. I'm not saying you don't use your eyes. I'm not saying you pretend you're blind all the time. But I wouldn't trust them. I wouldn't be led by them so much. Allow them to be one of the points of confirmation to you. Next question. Thanks, Michael. Okay. I'll disappoint you with my answer to this. There's a few questions I don't know the answer to, and this is one of them. I think the difference is academic, to be honest. I don't know what the difference between word of knowledge and prophecy is. A friend of mine who's a Bible teacher would say word of knowledge is much more about people being sick in the room and a word of healing coming for them. So word of knowledge is around miracles of healing or identifying a sickness or a specific area. Other people would say that when you're speaking to somebody very accurately about where their job is or where they live or who they're married to or their children, that's word of knowledge. I don't know. The only example I have to go by is when Jesus encounters the woman from Samaria. He tells her that she's had 5 husbands and she's living with somebody who's not her husband now. And then she says, "Sir, I perceive you are a prophet." She doesn't say, "Woo, wicked word of knowledge you've got there, man. You're pretty good." She says, I perceive you are a prophet. So, I don't know. I think it's an academic difference. So, sorry, don't really answer that question. Next question, Michael. Yeah, this is tricky. We just talked about this upstairs. What do you do with bad news? You make it as good news as you possibly can. And that takes a bit of practice. Generally, unless you've been doing this for a bit. So let's look at some scriptural perspectives. Okay. In the book of Acts, chapter 22, this unusual thing happens. I think it's 22. Paul and Luke and a few of the other guys are down in some part of Israel, and they're doing a couple of things, but one of the things they're trying to discuss what happens next. And this guy called Agabus comes down to that place, and it says that he meets with Philip and his daughters who are prophetesses. So Agabus is with them. Is that 22, is it? Michael's having a look. Agabus. And it's a church, they're having a meeting, but they're discussing a little bit about what happens for the future. And while they're chatting away, and I don't really know what the context, we don't get the detail much, but this unusual thing happens. Now, I could try this and it would end badly. I could walk over to Chris now and give this a bit of a go. I could ask Chris to stand up beside me and have a crack at this, but it's not going to work. It will end badly. Chris will hurt me. But what Agabus does is he walks over to Paul, I mean, we're talking about the Apostle Paul, St. Paul, and takes his belt off him. Shall we try it out, Chris? Come on. He takes his belt off him in a public meeting. Paul's pants might fall down. But he didn't wear pants, but he takes his belt off him. It's a slightly unusual thing, yeah? Or does it happen here all the time? So how on earth, it's 21, Acts 21, sorry. How on earth does Agabus have the right to go and take Paul's belt off him? Well, it says that this Agabus is the one that had prophesied the great famine through Europe. So Agabus had a track record. They knew who he was. He wasn't a random stranger. He wasn't just starting out in this. He wasn't a newbie. He had credibility. And then he takes Paul's belt off him, and he was within a prophetic community. So he was part of Adriana's team. He was in a prophetic community. He was accountable. He was being trained. He was loved. They knew who he was. And then he says this, bad news. This is pretty bad news, isn't it? This is what the Holy Spirit says, that this is in this way the Jews at Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt. All right, come on, Agabus, why take it off Paul? He could have just said it anyway, you. But he takes his belt off him and then binds Paul's hands. I mean, it's strange. Binds his own hands and his own feet. This is not like a quick prophecy. It's taken a wee while. Everybody's thinking, what's happened to Agabus? He's tying himself up in church with Paul's belt. Something weird's going down. It's strange, isn't it? It's strange. Like I say, unless it happens here all the time, I'd find it strange. But then Agabus says this over Paul, this is what's going to happen. Well, in fact, this is a great example where we see in part and we prophesy in part. This is not actually what happens. It's the Romans that bind Paul in Jerusalem, not the Jews. So he got it slightly wrong. He actually got it slightly wrong. But it's bad news, and Agabus does it to Paul. Now, I'm going to the extreme end of that question, and I'll answer the other part of it backwards. So doing a little bit of it back to front. Agabus has the right to do this because he has a credibility. They know who he is. He's in a prophetic community. He's respected. He's a respected prophet in their midst. Not anybody, not just anyone will be able to walk up to Paul and take his belt off him. You imagine that? So they know who Agabus is. He's got a credibility. So bad news, real bad news, generally comes from people with an established credibility in a context where it can be examined, where it can be judged, and when it can be questioned. Now, I would never do bad news publicly, and I don't. But I do bad news. I do bad news, and it's privately. And I do privately with the leadership of the church. And I do it with because they need to be followed up. They need to be cared for. They need to somebody to walk through them with this news, just like Paul did. And that's the Apostle Paul. So bad news does come. I think bad news not in terms of you're about to die or God doesn't even like you. That's just dumb stuff. But you're about to face some tough times. Like the man that went over to Myanmar. When you go there, the buildings are going to burn down. There'll be no loss of life. I was in Slovenia 2 years ago. I've just been back there. And I was leaving. My credibility was that the person that took me over there and the words that happened while I was there. So they had got a level of trust in me. This is all being translated. Slovene is an unusual language. Anybody speaks Slovene here? Remarkable if it is. You know how they say God? Bog. Bog. And the son is called sin. And I got up, and my first message, I said, I have no idea what sort of people I'm among. You sing to bog and sin. In New Zealand, bog's a toilet. Same here? Yeah. So I had some credibility because of the words that had happened previously, but I said, this is what I see for this nation. I see a series of floods coming. There'll be no loss of life, but your water table's going to rise. And geysers will erupt out of the ground, water will spurt out of the ground, and they'll have to move buildings. It'll disrupt buildings in this nation. And I don't even know whether it's possible that a water table can rise, but it's going to rise. And the buildings will be disrupted, and it's first in the natural, then in the spiritual. There's living water coming to this nation. It's going to get easier to share your faith. More and more people are going to become Christians. There's going to be greater unity among the churches. And Christians will have a higher role in the political arena. So, bad news, all bad news, flooding, doesn't sound good. But I had credibility with them, and I have been doing this for 36 years. Remarkably, I get an email from one of the pastors and saying our water table is lifted. Because I said, this will be all over the media. And they didn't have geysers. They didn't know what a geyser was. They've never seen one. We've got geysers that have disrupted buildings. They've had to shift some buildings. We've had 4 floods. No loss of life. And remarkably, it's getting easier for us to share our faith. And when I was there this time, there was up in the north, there's gypsy communities. They had 14 gypsies get saved in one week. Well, they don't get 14 people saved in the whole year across the whole nation. It feels like a revival to them. So amazing things are happening. But again, bad news. But I've got credibility with them. I've got a place with them. If I didn't have, I would have just taken a leader aside, personally, privately, and just shared it with them privately. So record this down. I'm not sure, but I just want to share this because I don't feel like I've got the credibility to do this publicly. Another example, then we'll finish. I'm at a church 3 years ago now, just 3 years ago, in New Zealand. and it's the church camp. There is about 130 people at the camp, 4 churches represented. One of the churches, you've had this guy here speaking, actually, Joel Milgate has spoken here, my friend. Back then, I didn't even know him. I'd never met him before. But I go to the church camp, and it's not sort of bad news. It sounds like good news, but it's tough news. I have a belief that the church is going to go through rapid exponential growth. Now, they don't know me well enough. This is the first time I've ever spoken to the church. So I take him aside before the meeting and say, Joel, I believe that your church is about to encounter rapid exponential growth. And I'm talking hundreds, if not thousands of people coming into church. And he said, Tony, I don't know. I actually don't know. There's about 90 come to our Sunday gatherings. So it sounds great, but I don't know whether it's right or not. So you do what you like with it. And I said, look, I feel like I should say it publicly if I've got your permission. So I do it publicly. And it was funny because one of the leaders pulled me aside and said to me afterwards, Tony, we've circled the wagons. We've got 3 months funds left. We're about to shut this whole thing down. We can't pay our bills. We don't think it's over. We used to be a church of about 250, but we've lost our staff, we've lost our building, we've lost everything. I was just speaking there about 3 weeks ago, 2,500 people call that place home now. 2,500 people. Remarkable. Now, again, what do you do with that sort of news? Submit it to the leaders first, privately, like I did with Joel. If it's bad news, like with Paul or with Slovenia, again, you've got to use your credibility. If you've got no credibility, if you're unknown to the church, never do it publicly. Just grab one of the leaders, do it privately, write it down. What's very important is that you stay with the word. So I think a mark of a good prophetic person is that they stay with the word. They take responsibility for it. They're accountable to it. So I say to churches, and I've done this about 3 times in my life, that if anything that I do or say is not helpful or confuses somebody, I will fly back myself at my own expense. And I'll stand in front of your church and I'll apologise. I'll help figure this out. I'll take responsibility for it if I've not been helpful.